Hi everybody, Charlene O'Hanlon here, the Managing Editor at DevOps.com and DevOps TV. I am here at DevOps Enterprise Summit 2018 Las Vegas. And on my left here is Mik Kersten, who is CEO and founder of Tasktop. Mik, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Charlene.
So I understand that you have a book coming out, and it's all about kind of that whole project to product revolution, if you will. Let's talk a little bit about that book, how you came to write it, and what it's about.
Sure. So yeah, we've got the book. It's being signed tomorrow. There are a couple thousand copies here at the DevOps Enterprise Summit, and it actually is getting launched on November 20th, so that's when it will be generally available. And yeah, I spent a good couple years putting together this what I consider to be this new language, this new framework to connect what business leaders understand and how they manage companies to technologists. And really the background that went to the book has a lot to do with the first 10 years of my career, where I was a developer, wrote a lot of open source code, and I actually studied that if we connected developers to the software value stream, to how we deliver value to the users of software, the customers of software, how much more work they got done, how much more productive they became, not just focusing on programming technologies, but this kind of end-to-end flow of business value. And then the second decade of my career, I was really trying to bring that same value to enterprise IT, to large-scale software delivery, in realizing that the problem is not just specific to developers. Gene Kim today mentioned that there are over 40 million IT practitioners, so this is much more than the 10 million of developers that we tend to focus on a lot, that I focused on a lot in the first part of my career. And so I started a company, Tasktop Technologies, to do this, but then realized that there was a far deeper problem here, that not only were we missing the kind of infrastructure layer that we saw from the past ages, where large organizations really mastered a new means of production. In the age before this one, that was mass production and building things like cars. In this age, it's mastering software. And we do know that tech giants, the FANGs, Facebook's, Amazon, Netflix, and Google, Microsoft, those kinds of companies, they've mastered it. But I noticed this massive disconnect between the way traditional businesses, who were actually born before the start of the age of software, so it's called before the 70s, were managing IT and software delivery. And they had this very completely broken and wrong layer between the business side and the technology side, and that layer actually was project management. It assumed that we have this high degree of certainty for outcomes for how we can allocate resources, which is great if we're in Vegas, if you're building the Hoover Dam. Project management and Gantt charts were actually pioneered as part of doing things like building the Hoover Dam. It's actually horrible if you're building software to an uncertain, fast-moving market, and you're trying to learn quickly, and you're trying to feed that learning back into the business. So I realized from that whole journey of trying to deliver these benefits of focus and flow to enterprise IT organizations, that the layer connecting the business side and the technology side, where these practices like Agile and DevOps were taking shape, was exactly the wrong layer. And I realized we need a new way of connecting business leaders and technologists. We can't just wait for programmers to become CEOs of every company. That's not exactly quick or realistic. But we need a new framework. We need a new way of connecting those two, because this project management layer, it's not good for these kinds of highly adaptive, agile, and changing things, which is what software innovation is.
Okay, so what can we do in place of the project manager then in this fast-moving software development space? It's if the old ways of working don't work, so what has to happen?
Right. So what we need to do is we need to focus on, first of all, we need to shift the focus from projects which have a well-defined time frame and where all the outcomes are defined up front. The business outcomes are a certain cost profile, a certain time delivery date, and so on, and they tend to be very long-lived. So we need to do instead what car manufacturers did 100 years ago, which is that they focused not on projects and budgets and time frames, they focused on products and value streams and what customers pulled through those value streams. So in the case of cars, it's easy. Customers pull cars they really want to buy, and the car manufacturers who produce cars that delight their customers more or are cheaper or higher quality, those are the ones who start winning over the market. So the fundamental question I was asking myself is, what is the unit of productivity in software? And the amazing thing is I actually asked this question to many of the IT leaders that I met with, and there isn't a consistent answer, which is a really odd thing when you think about it, because these organizations are spending so much of their budgets on software, but there isn't a common understanding of what productivity is. Now, we've got hints of it. People used to think it was lines of code that you wrote, or the people from the agile background, like myself, think of things like story points and so on. But you go look at CFO and tell them we're working on story points, and they might look at you like you're wearing a unicorn mask or something of that sort.
Right.
Yeah. So there were these languages, but there wasn't like the language of obviously the finance side, where you've got cost and budgets, the language of the technology side, where you've got story points and releases and continuous delivery and so on. But there wasn't a common language. And so what I've done is synthesized everything that we learned. And actually, I should mention, in Tasktop, we had this unique opportunity, because what we do is we actually connect the value streams of Fortune 500 companies. So we connect all these different Agile and DevOps tools that they're using into a unified flow. So they've got flow and feedback. And we do that across the tools by allowing them to model these values, create these value stream models, basically. As we did that, we realized that we had access to what turned out to be 308 organizations, different tool networks, and the flows they had. And so we actually got to see, wow, these things really are structured as projects. It's not they're just not just being managed as projects. In a tool like a Jira, or in a tool like an Azure DevOps, or those kinds of tools, these things are structured as projects. And we also got to realize what kinds of things were flowing, how organizations were using these tools. So from those learnings, I extracted that, took a bunch of the models that worked, right? Because we know that there's been adoption of things like Scrum as an Agile practice, things like Scaled Agile Framework, which is a very rich taxonomy of different types of work and work items. We know the different types of work that's actually come from the Phoenix Project and the DevOps movement. And I created this very high-level model of what I call our flow items, and there's just 4. And these flow items represent all work that's done in software delivery. And the 4 flow items are features, defects, risks, and debts. And so those are all the work being done by all the different specialists, developers, people working the support desk, people doing business analysis, and so on. They're delivering new business value to customers, pulling new features. They're reducing risks to make sure that they're compliant, that they're not exposing personally identifiable information, and so on. So those are all the different pulls on the value stream. And really the goal then is to start focusing on optimizing the flow of those, because if you want to bring a new product to market, you need to optimize for fast feature flow. That's going to determine the success of that product. Whereas if you've got a product that's still evolving, you might need to reduce its risk profile. You might need to reduce technical debt. What I realized is that by not having a common language between the technology side, which understood things like technical debt, and the business side, which didn't, we were having digital transformations go completely sideways, right? Amazon knows when to replatform. Microsoft knows when to replatform. LinkedIn has replatformed. Twitter has replatformed, and so on. But organizations who did not have technologists at the helm didn't. And so that's why there's this notion of risks in the framework as well, so that you realize when your feature velocity starts going down, 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 because the platform you're building on, the architecture, does not support the kind of feature flow you need, you might need to replatform, or you could lose your market for this product. In the case of a company like Nokia that I described in the book, just lose the entire market because they didn't replatform quickly enough to keep up with the iPhone. So there's more to the flow framework, but the core idea is that you create this value stream network and you observe it, you watch things flow. You do that per product. You stop looking at your software organization as discrete projects, or even as an org chart. You actually measure these flows across your product lines, and then in addition to tracking these 4 flow metrics, you also track business results and how those correlate. So business results are value. How much value did you generate as dollars, as adoption of an internal component that you might have used? Because products can be internal in organizations as well. There's a cost component, but you don't measure cost. What was my operations cost? What was my support cost? What was my engineering cost? You measure cost for that product's value stream, so you understand that cost. And this allows to actually end-of-life products. It's basically impossible to end-of-life projects on top of this, right? This is why organizations have so much trouble with the legacy they're building up. And then you actually do things like tracking happiness for a value stream. How engaged are the staff for that value stream? Because we know more engaged staff build better software. So this is what I'm expecting to replace this void that's going to be left there as organizations realize that project management is suitable for many things, but not for software innovation.
Okay. So what impact does that have on the jobs that the software developers and the IT operations personnel and everybody who's involved in that value chain. How does that impact the way that they work, and if it does, in what way?
Right. So I think the book does speak a lot to this organizational change, where you really look at your software product portfolio as a portfolio, and you measure flow and business results. But this absolutely has an impact on the way that the daily work of those different specialists happens. And that's really actually the goal, is to acknowledge that we have different specialists. If you're trying to create great web screens or mobile screens, you need great user interface designers. They will use a different tool, but we actually need to go, I should mention though, we've made some progress on this front. The concepts of things like feature teams, we have a cross-functional team, it has been getting better and better acceptance. It's a step in exactly the right direction. What this is saying is that we need to do more than feature teams. A value stream, a product value stream is going to be bigger. Some of our value streams have 5 teams, some large organizations may have 10.
Right.
I don't think you'd really go much more than 10 in a typical scenario, but say you'll put 10 feature teams on a single value stream, and those people have to all work for that value stream. And they might only have 1 or 2 graphic designers on that value stream, but they're all collaborating. And of course, they'll need to have some site reliability engineers, some SREs on that value streams, and SDETs and these other key roles. So the whole goal is that feature teams are already the right step in the right direction, but now for your product value streams, you treat them as one team of teams.
Okay.
And then that part of the organization, that product value stream, is responsible for doing things like setting, the flow framework calls, the flow distribution. So how much work should go to reducing tech debt in order to meet the North Star of the company. Because there are times where you actually want to take on tech debt because you've got a business goal, you've got to get to market, but then you also need to acknowledge that you have to pay it down after. So the idea is that these flow metrics are actually set by the value stream teams themselves.
Okay.
And it's really just a step of all that work getting more cross-functional. But it also means that you don't want to have one designer split across 10 different value streams, or one graphic designer. You want to start dedicating them to that value stream, so it's more cross-functional teaming in the end.
Okay.
So.
All right, great. So does your book offer any best practices or takeaways that people and companies can kind of keep in mind as they're maybe trying to make that move from the project-based thinking to the more product-based thinking?
Yeah, absolutely. It's got this initial set of practices, such as how you define your value stream network, how you model, how you integrate things, how you create this artifact model, how you create a product model. So it's got an initial set of best practices out there, and we're actually very actively now working on bringing it from our customers. It's got our customers' practices, how you measure things like flow time and these kinds of things. But I think the exciting thing is that we're just building out those best practices with the community that's here, our customer community, and so on. So we've actually created a new website that we just launched called flowframework.org, where we're going to be putting out these kinds of best practices, having others contribute, and really create the space where we can build out these kinds of practices. We're going to have an event in December. It's linked from flowframework.org, where we're going to bring together some people to start collaborating and thinking about what these best practices should be, because organizations are already doing it. They're setting up these product portfolios, which is one of the best practices, identified in the book. So you have to define that at the business level so that your people can then work in this way. But some of the practices are less obvious. The fact that if you take this, as we have done, organizational structure seriously, you start measuring things like employee net promoter score, employee satisfaction for the product value streams, not for organizational silos. So there's some kind of less intuitive practices, and that one actually I got from John Smart, that I think are fascinating, can yield some really interesting results that are just too difficult to see when you've got everything modeled in org charts and project plans.
Makes sense. Well, I look forward to seeing the book when it comes out.
Thank you, Charlene.